week 6 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few defense DST units I look to get off the wire this week. The first one, the Atlanta Falcons. So the Falcons, their defense, I know isn't that great this season, but this is a streaming option this week here for week 6 versus the Washington Commanders. That give up a lot of fantasy points, second most to defenses and DSTs on the season. So like I said, this Falcon defense isn't good. The only thing I'll give them, they keep points pretty low on the board, only teens to low 20s for the most part this season. But in terms of creating turnovers and putting up fantasy points, they haven't done that this season here, is the Atlanta Falcons. So right now, with a good matchup versus Washington, like I said, that turns the football over a lot and gives up the second most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. Atlanta is a streaming option, available 91% of the fantasy weeks. Next DST is the Los Angeles Rams. So this Ram DST over the last few seasons, we know they've traded players away. We know Aaron Donald as dominant as he was, but they're another streaming option versus the Arizona Cardinals. Even though this Cardinal offense has been pretty solid on the Joshua Dobbs, Hollywood Brown, James Conner, if he's going to play in this game, we know he got banged up. So they got some weapons on the offense, but this Ram DST, I think, could go out there and make some plays. So the last few weeks here, week 4 in Indianapolis, 23 points allowed, 2 sacks, a fumble recovery. And week 5 versus Philly just dominated time of possession and had long drives. This offense off the field. So right now, this Ram team is a 1-week streaming option. They're available in 98% of fantasy leagues. And like I said, I like the matchup for them at the Arizona Cardinals, even though this Cardinal team has been playing pretty solid offensively this season. Next defense DST is the Houston Texans. So the Texans, they weren't aired last week off the waiver wire, and they had a mediocre game at the Atlanta Falcons in week 5 as a streaming option where they gave up 21 points, 2 fumble recoveries. So week 6 here, good matchup versus the New Orleans Saints, where their offense is another offense that doesn't punch it into the end zone a lot. I know they won last week's ball game 34-0 at the New England Patriots, but I think this Texan defense, they can make some plays. They're back home this week, and there's a streaming option available right now in 72% of fantasy leagues. So like I said, this defense so far this season, they played well for the most part, even though they went to Atlanta in week 5 and didn't do much in that game. But right now is a streaming option once again this week. I would give them an ad this week. The next defense is the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars, I thought, for the most part of that game versus the Buffalo Bills in week 5, they held their own, and it was a nice upset victory for this Jacksonville Jaguar team. So this season, they've had some big pop games. Week 1 in Indianapolis, 15 points allowed, 4 sacks, and interception, 2 fumble recoveries. Week 2 versus Kansas City, a great offense, obviously, 17 points allowed, a sack, an into, 2 fumble recoveries. Then week 4 versus Atlanta, a big game, 7 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 interceptions, a fumble recovery, touchdown. And then even week 5 versus Buffalo, 20 points allowed, an into, and a fumble recovery. So this week here, week 6, we're Gardner Minshew, most likely quarterback for this Indianapolis Colts team. A former Jacksonville Jaguar, obviously. I think this Jaguar team could get a few turnovers. They could get pressure on Minshew. And like I said, we've seen them play good defense versus good quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes in week 2. And then last week at Buffalo, even though it was pretty much like a home game for Jacksonville, this second home is London. They had a good game holding Buffalo to 20 points. So right now, while they're available in 84% of fantasy leagues, I would give them an ad this week in the 5th and final defense DST. I would add the Las Vegas Raiders. I know they didn't play Monday Night Football yet, is this Raider team, and I know their defense pretty much isn't good for fantasy football this season, but they got a great matchup here week 6 versus the Patriots. I give up the 3rd most fantasy points on the season. So right now, Mac Jones, he's been horrible this season. Bailey Zappi came in 2 games in a row now, week 4 versus Dallas and week 5 versus the Saints, to come in for Mac Jones, and he didn't do much better either. But I know this Patriot team, they really don't have a number 1 wide receiver. You got Juju Smith-Schuster, he hasn't done anything this season. Devontae Parker, he's been up and down throughout his NFL career. Hunter Henry, he's been a decent tight end over the last few seasons, but he's inconsistent as well. So right now, not many weapons over there in New England. This defense of the Raiders, I know, isn't good, but it's another home game here for the Vegas Raiders. And I think in this one, they can make a few plays. And if you're desperate in deepest of leagues for a DST streaming option, they are available in 99% of fantasy leagues. So that's a few defense DST units I look to add off the wire for week 6 of the fantasy football season.